In Pokemon Sun and Moon, if you head to the outer cape of Mali City and speak to a jester, after you meet certain criteria, he will teach you different battle poses and Pokeball throwing animations. There are a total of 9 different pose and throw animations that add extra depth of customization, and this is one of many of what I like to call forgotten mechanics. I call them forgotten mechanics because they are, in my opinion, great mechanics that Game Freak seem to not add in future Pokemon games because, well, they forgot. This isn't including obvious game exclusive mechanics like totem battles or the underground, but content that definitely could and should be used in future games but just haven't for some reason. In the case of this pose and throw animation, Game Freak did add these back eventually in the Indigo Disc DLC for Scarlet and Violet, but that was years later, and there are plenty more of forgotten mechanics that I'd like to remind you of. Some of these you may not even know existed in the first place, because the forgotten mechanics tend to be somewhat obscure to access and no one in the game really tells you about them. For example, in Pokemon X and Y, you may remember the roller skates that never returned, but if you look even closer, there are actually different tricks you can learn from different NPCs around the game. The most crazy being the Cosmic Flip, and without the internet I don't think I would have ever learned about this mechanic, just because of how random it is to find. In 5th gen, triple and rotating battles were introduced. They were then featured in 6th gen, but later dropped in Sun and Moon, and I can only guess that's because of the lack of power the 3DS had to run these battles with sprite heavy Pokemon such as Moltres. But that only begs the question, why haven't these returned since? But if you think that's obscure, do you remember Sky Battles? In 6th gen, Sky Battles were battles you could only take part in if you had a flying Pokemon on your team, and if you had one, well, that's the only Pokemon you could use in that battle, and if it fainted, game over. Even more interesting though, is Pokemon with the ability Levitate could be used in these battles. This includes Pokemon like Carnivine, Electros, and Cryogonal. These Pokemon can levitate, but how they actually fly is beyond me, and could you believe Sky Battles get even stranger? Some Pokemon, either flying types or Pokemon with Levitate, cannot be used in Sky Battles, despite these attributes. These include Gengar, Scizor, and Dusclops. This is especially strange because Carnivine is allowed, but not Gengar, who has been shown to be able to fly on multiple occasions, and remember, Haunter is allowed to fight in these battles. And Pokemon that can use the move Fly, but don't have Levitate or the flying type, can also not be used, such as Golurk. But there is one Pokemon who actually is a flying type, but is unable to take part in these Sky Battles, and that is Mega Pinsir. This actually does make sense, because in order to use Mega Pinsir, you would have to send the original Pinsir out in battle, and he is not a flying type. In Sky Battles, you can also not use certain moves, like Dig, which makes sense, but you can also not use the following moves: Geomancy, Mat Block, Stomp, Slam, Body Slam, and Substitute. And to be honest, I have no idea why. As well as these type of battles, Gen 6 introduced inverse battles. They were very limited, but reversed the type chart and they never returned again. I honestly really like these battles, and I think more obscure stuff like this should be included in future Pokemon games. In Pokemon Black and White, as well as the usual day and night cycle, seasons were added. It allowed routes to change layout and the player to access certain areas they otherwise couldn't before. It would change the encounter rate of certain Pokemon, unlock specific battles, and change the game's music. This feature has not returned since, which is especially strange considering Deerling and Swordsbuck were created with this feature in mind. Pokeathlon was introduced and is exclusive to Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where players can enter their Pokemon to play a variety of sports minigames to win different prizes, and to be honest, with the return of the Battle Frontiers and the Pokemon contests, I'm surprised the Pokeathlon hasn't returned. This would be a great addition to new Pokemon games in my opinion, and would add a great replacement for Pokemon contests, since the prizes and currency actually give the player a reason to compete in these different sports. Heart Gold and Soul Silver do hold an even more obscure feature that is forgotten, and that is the Shiny Leaf and the Shiny Leaf Crown. Shiny Leafs can be obtained by speaking to your following Pokemon in specific locations until they find the leaf, and when you have collected 5 of these Shiny Leafs, for one Pokemon, they will earn the useless but aesthetically pleasing Shiny Crown. With the return of following Pokemon in a lot of newer Pokemon games, I'm really unsure why this feature hasn't returned yet. And to be honest, it's a lot cooler than a ribbon. Also, apparently the official strategy guide for Heart Gold and Soul Silver states that Fire, Ground and Rock type Pokemon cannot obtain the Shiny Leaf on Route 33, which is completely untrue, so I'm not sure how this happened. HMs have always been a pain for all Pokemon fans, but with HM Dive, it only ever appeared in Hoenn and Unova. It seems weird to see it in Unova because the Abyssal Ruins just seems like a random reason to use it. You essentially just need it to get the Arceus plates. HM Whirlpool is used even less and only has ever appeared in Johto, so just Gold and Silver and their remakes. Defog is the same, it's only used outside of battle in Diamond and Pearl and their remakes, if you can call them remakes. So a lot of HMs have died throughout the mainline games, but to be honest, I don't think many people care. I think Dive was the only one that was maybe interesting. Fishing has changed throughout the mainline games a lot, and although it's returned now and then, its mechanics always seem to change. The Good and Old Rod were both dropped in Pokemon Black and White for some reason, only leaving the Super Rod. The Good and Old Rod then returned in X and Y, only to be dropped again in Sun and Moon. And then for the first time in mainline game history, in Scarlet and Violet, fishing was dropped completely, and I'm surprised no one seems to talk about this. So there are some forgotten mechanics throughout the mainline Pokemon games, and if you like this video and want to learn more about these, comment below and please subscribe.